Okay, my sock friends, we have we've knitted the cuff of our sock, and now we're ready to turn the heel. And so I wanted to kind of just show you for a second before we do it. This is what the heel should look like when you're doing it. So you should see these really lovely sort of elongated stitches. They'll actually look like this when you're doing it. So these nice elongated stitches, those are your slip stitches when you're working. So it's really important to pay attention that when it tells you on the right side to slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one, you're doing that all the way across because that's what's in parentheses, right? So slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one. You're slipping as if to purl because the rule in knitting is you always slip as if to purl unless you're doing a decrease or what otherwise instructed. And slipping as if to purl means the direction of the needle, not the location of the yarn. So your yarn will always be to the wrong side of your work when you're doing this. Then when you're on your wrong side and you're coming back, it says slip one and purl to end. There are no parentheses. So that means you're going to slip your first stitch and then you're going to purl to the end. So what you end up with is this sort of waffly appearance on the inside, and it's super squishy. And that keeps your heels protected and keeps it from wearing out faster. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to do the heel flap. We're going to turn the heel, my very favorite thing in all of knitting. And then we're going to pick up the gusset. So I have this little sample here. Yours may very well have a much longer cuff. Don't worry about that. I just did a nice short little cuff because honestly, that's what I like. So the first thing you're going to notice is your pattern will tell you to knit across the front of your stitches. And a lot of people in the class had a question of what is the front and what is the back. Remember, when your tail and your working yarn are on the same side, that means you've completed a round. So this is the front of your sock and also the top of your sock. So what I'm going to do is just knit across, and then we're going to be working only on those back stitches. So since this doesn't matter how you knit, I'm just going to knit the way I knit so I can do it a little bit more quickly and get there. So our rules so far in doing this have been for knitting in the round. So now, in essence, all of our rules are going to go out the window because we are now going to be working flat. When we get to this back side, right? So now this is the back of our sock, right? Or the bottom of our sock. Now we're going to start the heel. We're starting it on the right side. My heel coming from the back of my sorry, it just looked like my video had gone out. Anywho, the yarn's still coming from the back needle, right? And I'm going to work just across these front stitches. So it says to slip one, knit one, repeat all the way across. So I'm going to slip a stitch purlwise, and then I'm going to knit a stitch and slip a stitch purlwise and knit a stitch. You'll notice that my yarn is in back the whole time. I'm never having to move it. And it's always slip a stitch and then knit a stitch. And because you have an even number of stitches, you should end with a knit. If you end with something other than a knit, you've done something wrong. Now, for the first time in this project, we are working flat. So this time, my yarn is coming from this needle. I'm going to use my other needle, and I'm going to work back on that back needle, leaving my front stitches hanging there and leaving them alone. My pattern tells me to slip one, pardon me, and then purl all the way across. So that's what I'm going to do. I slip that first one. I'm going to purl the rest of my stitches. You'll notice that that slip one was with the yarn in front, or AKA the yarn to the wrong side. I figure you don't need to know how to purl. I'm just going to be chatting with you as I'm doing this. So you're going to do that same thing over and over again. On the right side, you will slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one, etc. to the end. And on the wrong side, you will slip one and purl to the end. And I realize I've dropped a stitch, so I'm going to fix that. In the end, it's going to look like this. And those elongated stitches, if you're making the smaller size, first one is here, you should have 11, I believe. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 10. If you're making the larger size, you should have 11. So again, that's your first one. And you can tell just because it's longer than the ones before it. So 11 of those. So I'm going to stop the video, get caught back up, and then I'm going to walk you through turning the heel. Okay, so I am back, and we have, I've created the heel flap, right? So your work should look like this. And if for some reason you're seeing strands of yarn on the front of your work that look a bit like this, that means you forgot and you were slipping with your yarn in front. So remember, purl-wise means the yarn is in the back. All right, so now we're going to do what's called turning the heel. So you should be right here in your pattern. And so you're going to be doing essentially short rows. And this is easy peasy short rows because we're not really worrying about rapid turns and that sort of thing. But what we're trying to do is get this flat piece of work to all of a sudden be rounded in the shape of a heel. So my first line of my pattern says to slip one. So again, I'm going to do that purl-wise, and I'm going to knit 9. I'm making the smaller size. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so I've slipped one, I've knit 9, slipped 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. Let me do one more. And now I'm going to do an SKPO. So an SKPO is a decrease. And to do that decrease, we are going to slip one stitch knitwise this time. So remember the saying in retail, the rule in retail, you always slip as if to purl unless you're doing a decrease or otherwise instructed. Another way to look at that, and I've always loved this, Sharon Mooney told me this, you would always slip as if to knit unless the acronym includes a K. And if the acronym includes a K, you would slip, you'd always slip as if to purl, forgive me, unless the acronym includes a K. So an SKPO or an SSK, you would slip knitwise. So anyway, here we go. So slipping one knitwise, and then I'm going to knit one, right? So however you knit, just knit one little stitch, and then I'm going to pass that slip stitch over essentially as if I were binding off. And that gives me a really lovely left-leaning, quite smooth left-leaning decrease. And then really, really important, you must knit one before you turn. So I'm going to knit one more stitch, and then I'm just going to turn my work. And when I turn my work, I will have 5 stitches left unworked. So I'm going to turn, and I'm going to ignore those little stitches. And then in my row 2, it says slip 1, purl 3. So I'm purling 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to purl 2 together. Normal little purl 2 together, however you purl. And then again, really, really important, purl 1. Purling 1. And that will leave me 5 stitches left unworked. So every time you complete a purl row in turning the heel, you will have the same number of stitches left unworked at each side. The number will change, right, with each row, but you'll have this, it will be equal on each side. So my next row is to slip 1 and knit 4. And here's what I really want to show you. See this nice big gap right here? Essentially what you're doing is slipping 1 and working to 1 stitch before the gap, and then you're going to close your gap with the appropriate decrease. We're on the knit side. What's going on with my recording? Hold on one sec. That was a call from my husband. which I just declined so that I can still show you how to turn a heel. Okay, so I'm gonna slip one knitwise, knit one, and pass that slip stitch over as if I were binding off. And then again, really, really important, knit one more stitch. That leaves me 3 stitches unworked, right? Remember, I still have 5 over here because I have not finished a purl row yet. Turn my work, and again, I'm going to slip one, purl to 1 stitch before that decrease, or before that gap, and then I'm going to decrease over that gap. There's my big old gap. I'm on a purl side, so I'm going to purl 2 together and purl 1. And there I go. 3 stitches unworked, 3 stitches unworked. It's a really, really, really important check because if you just check that each time, it's such a simple check, and then you know you're right. Look how cute this little heel is already, right? That's the little thing you're working. Okay, again, I'm gonna slip one, and I'm gonna work to 1 stitch before that gap. And this works pretty much for all traditional heel turning. Slip one knitwise, knit one, pass your slip stitch over, work 1 stitch. That leaves me 1 stitch unworked. Turn, slip one. I'm going to now purl to 1 stitch before the gap. Okay, 1 stitch before the gap. I'm just going to purl 2 together and purl 1. Again, that leaves me with 1 stitch unworked on each side. Turn my work, slip 1, work all the way to 1 stitch before the gap. Those are my last 2 stitches, so I know I'm not going to have another knit one. I'm just going to slip 1, knit 1, pass my slip stitch over, and I'm done. Working back over to the other side, I'm going to slip 1 and purl to 1 stitch before the gap. Where I'm going to purl 2 together, and I'm done with my beautiful little heel. Isn't that just the cutest thing? I swear, I just love this. Okay, so once I have worked my heel flap and I've turned my heel, now I have to pick up my gusset. So to do that, I'm going to first work all the way across my heel stitches. And just your normal knitting. And once I've worked across my normal heel stitches, the rule is typically you pick up every slip stitch plus 1. And that plus 1 is typically up here in the heel that you've worked. It is not a wrong thing to pick up another one down here. I would say, 25% of the sock knitters pick up all slip stitches plus 2. I would just tell you to pick up whatever looks good in your sock and just work it out later. The only thing that's important is each side needs to have the same number of stitches picked up. Okay, so let's see how close I can get for you here. All right, see this stitch right here? This is one of my slip stitches from my heel. And see this stuff right here? This is one of my slip stitches at that very edge. If I come under one of the bars from the heel and both bars from that slip stitch and come through all of it, it gives me a nice little bit that's not horribly holy. Then that's number 1. Then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to pick up every one of these slip stitches. But I really, really want you to see how much this curls. You can real easily think this is your edge, but it's not. It's all the way over here. These are the edge stitches that you want to pick up. It's this pretty, really pretty braid on the inside of that heel. So while you're doing this, I want you to roll your work towards you. so you can really see those stitches. You're going to come under both bars of that stitch and pick it up. It's done the same way whether you knit continental or throw. Pick up both bars, knit the stitch, and pull the stitch under. Pick up both bars, knit the stitch, both bars, knit the stitch. And you're going to do this for each one of those nice and tall, elongated side stitches. Okay, so we had 10 heel stitches, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and now we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 along the side, and we need one more. And that one more is going to be this very last one down here. That's still a nice elongated stitch. And now I have this gap, okay, right in here. There are several ways to deal with this gap. I deal with this in the same way that I deal with it in working under the arm on a sweater. And so that is, I go ahead and pick up the bar that's between the two. And I want to pick it up to where the stitch is on backwards. So see this right here, the front leg is forward of the back leg, which means that stitch is oriented correctly. So instead, I'm going to pick it up from behind so that bar is oriented incorrectly. I don't want to just work that one stitch, because if I just work that one stitch, I actually get an extra, and I don't want an extra stitch. I just want that bar to help go away. So I am going to, I want you to see this, pull up on it with my index finger on the back of that stitch, because this is hard to get into. And I'm going to come into the stitch just to the left of it, and I'm going to knit those two together. It's particularly challenged to do at this angle, you guys. And so let me see if I can pull this up for a second. Sorry, you're going to get a little feedback there, but hopefully you'll be able to see this. Right there and into both. It helps a lot if you come down to the end. Helps a lot if you have really sharp needles, which I do not. Okay, once I've gone through both, I'm going to go ahead and knit that stitch. And in doing that, I'm going to split a stitch a little bit. I'm going to come back and fix that. It goes ahead and leans to the right and is quite pretty. Just grab that little. I'm going to do it again because I don't like a split stitch there. Okay. Going backwards. And all the way off. Grab a smaller, pointier needle to get through. There you go. You do that, just pull up on it, make it the full size there, and take it off. And that's a really nice way of doing it. Okay, put this back down again so you don't get all that feedback. All right, so I'm now just going to knit across the front of my sock. And then I'm going to have to do my first adjustment on my needles. Okay, when I get to the very end, the very last stitch on the front, I'm just going to slip it because I'm going to work it here again in a second. And so what I want to show you is what you have. You have all of your heel stitches, 1/2 of the gusset, and all of the front stitches. And they're all on one needle, right? My other needle, and the rest of my cable is all right here. So I need to adjust that to where I don't have everything on one. This is 18 stitches across the front, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. So at that break between the front and the gusset, I'm going to pull my cable out. So now I have all of my stitches on the front stitches all together on one needle, and my side and back are on another. I'm going to now be picking up and knitting the stitches along this gusset. The first thing I need to do is deal with, again, this funny gap that's between the two. So I'm going to grab this particularly curly set of needles. I'm missing my signatures. I'm going to grab this bar that's between the two of them, and I'm going to pick it up from the front to the back so it's sitting on my needle correctly. I'm going to slide the last stitch on my right hand needle back to my left. And this time, I would work these two stitches as an SSK, okay? But I want the back stitch to twist. I want it to be a little smaller. So I'm just going to reorient the first stitch so it's sitting on my left needle backwards. That bar is sitting on correctly, and I'm going to knit the two together through the back loop. And that's going to twist that bar and make it shorter, and I have that nice pretty stitch sitting on the top. From there, I'm going to go ahead and pick up my 11 stitches up the side. So when I turn this over, and I do like to go ahead and count these things from the beginning and take a look at them and have a little pokey for that. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So my first one is actually this one. See that? So it's important to kind of recognize which is the first stitch along the way. So I'm going to pull this needle out, come into that first stitch, pick it up and knit it. Some people find one side significantly easier than the other. I've always found coming in this way easier to see my stitches, but I've heard I'm one of the rare ones in that. So one side's going to be easier for you than the other. Again, it doesn't matter if you're knitting continental or throwing, it's the same thing. Roll it towards you, find the full stitch, wrap it, and come through both of those bars. Obviously, the other style of knitting is easier for me. It's good that I do this sometimes because it slows me down. Okay, come through, wrap, and come under. Find both strands, wrap your needle, come under both strands. And under both. And remember, we're picking up 11 stitches for the same number of stitches you did on the other side. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And my last one up here, I'm gonna look for where my stitch is. My last one is going to be this right here. Right there. Okay, so now I have my gusset, my heel, my heel, and my other gusset. And okay, so if you are doing a pattern that is written for double pointed needles, then this front of your needle is considered needle 2, this is considered needle 1, and this is considered needle 3, and your beginning and end of round is in the middle of the back of your heel. I tell you this because you're going to want to convert other patterns, so that's really important. Needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, beginning and end of round is right in the back. Because we're not converting a pattern and we're doing this specifically for Magic Loop, I like to make my beginning and end of round right here so that all of my back stitches are done at one time and all of my front stitches are done at one time. So I'm just going to knit all the way to the end of the back so that I can start my next round. And it doesn't matter how you knit, just get there, because now you're going to start your gusset decreases. The gusset is what allows for the instep of our foot, right at that wider point of where our ankle and feet meet. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Oh, and we have to do one more adjustment on our needles. So that same little spot, that's my little double stitch where I did that decrease. That same little spot, I'm going to make a bend and pull my cable out. And now I have all of my heel stitches are on the back and my front stitches are on the front. And what we're going to be making is this gusset. So this triangle right in here is what we're creating, right? So this really pretty little triangle right in here is what we're doing. Okay. On the front, when you're working the gusset, you are just going to knit your stitches. So you're just going to simply knit across. The back is where all the magic happens. So knit any way you like, all the way across the front of your stitches. And again, you won't do any adjustments at all on the front of your stitch until you get to your toe decrease, which is a ways from now. Okay, then now I'm starting here, right? So I'm working in the round still. I'm still needing to adjust my, if you think about it, it looks like this essentially, right? I'm still in magic loop. All of my stitches from the back are going to come up onto this needle. And this gets a little easier as you get a little further away. My front needle is going to pull out. Sorry. Front needle is going to pull out. And now, on this side, when I start my decreases, I'm always going to knit one stitch, and then I'll knit two together, and then I'm going to work all the way to the last 3 stitches, SSK, and knit 1. If you are not great at remembering where these decreases are going to happen, I strongly suggest using a marker, locking marker or ring marker after that knit 1. So knit 1 and then SSK. So slip 1 knitwise, slip 1 knitwise, enter the front of those 2 stitches and knit them together. And then you're just going to knit all the way to the last 3 stitches. And then we'll knit 2 together and knit 1. And in doing your decreases, you'll have a decrease round followed by a plain round throughout. And when do you know you're done with your decreases? When the number of stitches on the front meet the number of stitches on the back. So when your back needle is back to 18, if you're making the small, then you are done with your decreases. And then you're just going to knit straight around. So I'm down to my last 3 stitches, and I'm just going to knit these 2 stitches together and then knit 1. And now I'm going to come back to the front. I'm going to knit across those, knit all the way around, and then do a decrease round again. Again, it's all in your pattern, you guys. So hopefully that's a good little reminder from our class, and that is all you will need. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.